On the evening of November 2nd, 2001, Irene Jones and her daughter Isabella went out to celebrate Irene's 56th birthday. They shared what seemed like a lovely meal together before heading home, but by the end of the night, only one of them would survive. After a quick stop for gas, Isabella walked into the house alone. She says she had no idea what was waiting inside. What unfolded would set off years of suspicion, uncover strange secrets, and leave friends and family questioning everything. Megan Jones, later known as Isabella Carolina Camelo Gomez, was born in 1974 in Sydney, New South Wales, Australia. Public information about her early years and personal life is extremely limited, though it is known she was the only child of Irene Jones, a single mother who raised her. No details about her father's identity have surfaced, nor are there records of her schooling or employment history. Isabella lived with Irene into adulthood in a charming suburban home Irene had bought in Sydney. Irene Caroline Jones, born on November 1945, was widely known as a devoted, generous woman and a caring mother. After retiring, she dedicated much of her time to volunteering for various charities. Friends and neighbors described her as sweet and hospitable, often offering her home to those in need. Irene was known to provide not only a loving home, but also financial support to Isabella. Even during brief periods when they lived apart, Irene always welcomed Isabella back. To the outside world, their relationship appeared close-knit and supportive. However, later accounts would reveal a different dynamic. Despite her public shyness and insecurity, Isabella was reportedly disrespectful and sometimes abusive toward her mother behind closed doors. Matters worsened in 1999 when Isabella met a woman named Paula Camelo at their local Mormon church. Over time, Isabella and Paula became close friends, and Paula eventually introduced her husband, Carlos Camelo Gomez, a Colombian native. This introduction would mark the beginning of a chain of events that deeply affected everyone involved. The couple started spending more time with Isabella, and Carlos eventually mentioned his brother Cesar, who was stuck in Colombia due to visa issues. In March 2001, Isabella traveled to Colombia to meet Cesar. Soon after, she claimed they had fallen in love and married him, news that shocked Irene. Despite her objections, Irene learned of the marriage through photos, to which Isabella reassured her it was merely a fake marriage. Following this, Isabella adopted the name Isabella Carolina Camelo Gomez and grew increasingly close to Carlos. Their bond raised suspicions, particularly since Cesar was still unable to join her in Australia. Paula, growing jealous, suspected an affair between Isabella and her husband. It later emerged that Isabella was financially supporting Carlos, sending money to his family in Colombia. Carlos even had a separate room in Irene's house and a private phone to communicate with Isabella in secret. She reportedly bought him a car, yet he continued to pressure her for more, hinting he would leave Paula for her. Tensions between Irene and Isabella escalated as Irene opposed Isabella's financial support of Carlos. This led to intense conflicts, with Isabella allegedly becoming physically aggressive. A friend of Irene later recounted instances where Isabella's anger turned violent, breaking her mother's glasses and, on one occasion, reportedly pinning her down by the neck. Irene confided in this friend, admitting she was frightened but hesitant to involve the police, fearing potential fallout. She also felt threatened by Paula, who reportedly arrived at the house on multiple occasions, threatening to burn it down. In response, Irene installed security lights, though it offered little comfort. Witnesses describe Carlos as aggressive and domineering toward Irene, physically intimidating her and further isolating her within her own home. Irene saw him as a manipulative presence who was not only depleting her finances, but also eroding her sense of safety and control. Carlos's control reached unimaginable levels when he demanded that Irene mortgage her home, transfer its ownership to Isabella, or sell it to provide him with $20,000 to start a construction business. By May 2001, tensions had reached a breaking point. Carlos and Paula had separated, and shortly afterward Carlos moved permanently into Irene's home. Irene felt pressured to vacate her main bedroom so he could share it with her daughter. Then, in October 2001, Carlos claimed he was returning to Colombia, but Irene later found out he was still around and confided in a friend about her concerns. She grew more anxious after learning that her mail was being redirected to an address in Maryland, where Carlos and Isabella had briefly stayed earlier that year. Irene was perplexed by the situation, especially as Isabella, despite receiving money to pay household bills, had not done so, using the funds to pay off her own debts instead. With mounting debts from the car she had bought for Carlos, Isabella even owed Irene a significant amount. As the financial strain intensified, Isabella renewed her push for Irene to sell the house. However, Irene refused, threatening to change her will, which had initially left her assets to Isabella in the event of her passing. Despite the friction, things appeared to settle somewhat between mother and daughter, and no one found it odd when they went out together on November 2, 2001, to celebrate Irene's 56th birthday. Although Irene was still apprehensive, she decided to make the most of this momentary peace, hoping to enjoy a calm evening with her daughter after nearly 2 years of constant tension. Their meal at the restaurant seemed pleasant, and after paying the bill around 7 p.m., the two women left to drive home. Isabella took the wheel, but upon arrival she told Irene that the fuel tank was nearly empty and suggested that Irene go inside while she quickly stopped by the gas station. Irene entered the house alone while Isabella drove to refuel, returning around 8:15 p.m., citing abdominal cramps from her period and wanting a hot shower. After parking the car, Isabella went straight to the bathroom. Following nearly half an hour in the shower, she emerged, wrapped her hair in a towel, applied face cream, and prepared for bed. However, when Isabella opened the bathroom door, she was met with a terrifying sight. Standing in front of her was an intruder, a blond man in a beige long-sleeve shirt, his face covered with a pantyhose mask and wearing white gloves. According to Isabella, terror-stricken, she tried to flee through the bathroom's outdoor exit. However, the intruder reportedly yanked her back violently with a cord or cable around her neck. Isabella claimed she struggled fiercely, but the man struck her and pushed her onto the bed, attempting to undress her. She screamed for help, causing the man to flee. Shaken and terrified, she bolted to the nearest neighbor's house, frantically knocking and crying out for help, saying someone had broken into her home. The neighbors let her in, and Isabella urgently expressed concern for her mother. They advised her against going back, fearing it was unsafe. Isabella then borrowed the neighbor's phone and dialed Australia's emergency number, 000, anxiously informing the operator that an intruder had attacked her and that her mother was still inside. Police and ambulance units arrived shortly after. While paramedics attended to Isabella, officers searched the home, where they made a horrifying discovery. Irene's lifeless body was found face down on the floor, showing signs of strangulation and cuts on her neck. Officers immediately cordoned off the crime scene, calling in homicide detectives and forensic experts. The home appeared disturbed, with items scattered, initially suggesting a burglary gone wrong. However, valuable items were left untouched, and there were no signs of forced entry or missing belongings. Isabella was taken to the hospital to receive treatment for her injuries and to recover from the traumatic incident. During the ambulance ride, a friend of Irene's accompanied her. Isabella repeatedly asked about her mother, insistent on seeing her. Irene's body was transported to the morgue, where a post-mortem examination revealed that she had died from a combination of asphyxiation and sharp force injuries. It was determined that she had been rendered unconscious by strangulation before being attacked with a sharp object on the left side of her neck. The cuts were not immediately fatal, leading the assailant to use 2 ligatures around her neck, leaving a distinctive double mark on her skin. In total, she sustained 22 injuries, with the time of death estimated around 9:30 p.m., with a possible margin of error of 3 hours. The ligatures and sharp object used in the assault were never found. After leaving the hospital, Isabella stayed with one of Irene's cousins and her husband. The couple, deeply fond of Irene, described her as a kind soul, incapable of harming anyone, and were devastated by the brutal nature of her death. The investigation into Irene's death continued, but interviews with neighbors, friends, and family yielded no leads to help authorities identify or arrest a suspect. Frustrated, investigators sought to re-interview Isabella, but Irene's cousin and her husband reported that Isabella was constantly distressed and often cried when remembering her mother. Some sources even claimed they had to call an ambulance after Isabella overdosed on sleeping pills prescribed to help her rest. When the police finally spoke with her, they asked if Irene had any enemies or if anyone might wish to harm her. Isabella mentioned only a minor traffic incident she was involved in, but the other driver was quickly ruled out. By this point, investigators began doubting Isabella's account. Although both Isabella and Carlos were seen as suspects, there was no concrete evidence tying them to Irene's murder. At Irene's funeral on November 9th, some attendees allegedly heard Isabella mutter incriminating words, though this information would surface only years later, as witnesses initially believed she was rambling in grief. After the murder, Carlos and 2 of his friends were questioned. One of them, named Sean, stated he was at home, arriving around 5 p.m. and then falling asleep until 8:30 p.m. when Carlos and another friend, Nicholas, joined him. He explained that Carlos sometimes stayed over, sleeping on his couch. Around 1 a.m., Sean woke briefly to find his friends on the sofa. By 3 a.m., the police arrived to interview him, to which he claimed no knowledge of Carlos's connections with Irene or Isabella. Carlos and Nicolas provided statements placing themselves together in various locations until midnight, giving Carlos an alibi near the time of Irene's death. Carlos admitted meeting Irene and Isabella through his ex-wife Paula, claiming they had helped him post-separation. He noted that he once held a key to the Jones house but had since lost it. The investigation seemed to stall until, a year after Irene's death, her daughter sold the house for $300,000. In November 2002, Isabella gave birth to her first child with Carlos. Initially, she denied he was the father, stating he was only a friend and brother-in-law. Later, she admitted the child resulted from a casual encounter, after which she realized her true feelings for Carlos, deciding to divorce Cesar to be with him. Disturbing details about Isabella's relationship with the Camelo family heightened police suspicions. However, without solid evidence, Isabella remained uncharged, and Cesar was never questioned despite his occasional stays in Australia. Over time, the case languished without arrests or a clear answer regarding who was responsible for Irene's death. In January 2003, the case took a new turn when Isabella reported Carlos for assault. Police records reveal that she stated they had known each other for about 4 years and had been in an on-and-off relationship for the last 3. Years passed with no progress until November 2007, when a forensic inquest took place to re-examine evidence with the potential to refer the case to prosecutors if warranted. Though Isabella attended, she offered no new information. However, one witness, Diane McLeod, who had accompanied Isabella in the ambulance, shared new details. Diane recalled that Isabella had initially told detectives she did not see her mother during the attack, but had mentioned seeing Irene in the house to her during the ambulance ride. Diane also reported that Irene had confided in her about her fears regarding Isabella's connection to the Camelo family, particularly Paula's threats. Carlos, in a follow-up interview, stated that he met Isabella at a cyber cafe around 7:30 p.m. on November 2nd before heading to Sean's house between 8 and 8:30 p.m. He then claimed he returned to the cyber cafe before heading back to Sean's and then to a club with Nicola where they stayed until midnight. He denied being near the Jones house that evening, though his statements contained minor inconsistencies. Ultimately, the investigation concluded with insufficient evidence to proceed to trial, leaving the true identity of Irene's killer undetermined. The lead investigator recommended offering a $100,000 reward for information leading to an arrest and suggested the case be transferred to the Homicide and Cold Case Unit for further examination. Between March and September 2013, the deputy state coroner reviewed the case again, yet it remained amid 700 other unsolved cases, limiting resources and attention. No further developments occurred until March 2017, when the Ministry of Police approved the suggested reward. New witnesses came forward, and a forensics team re-examined evidence collected from the initial investigation. Among the items was a yellow blouse Isabella wore the night of the crime, preserved in a forensic lab since 2001. This item had not previously undergone forensic analysis, as the technology available today didn't exist at the time. According to records, the blouse was retrieved from storage by state forensic staff in March 2013, photographed, and then returned to the lab for analysis in April that year, remaining under police custody thereafter. The forensic analysis from July 2017 provided significant insights when microscopic tests and DNA sampling were conducted on the blouse Isabella wore on the night of Irene's death. The tests revealed small brown stains consistent with traces of bodily fluids on the front and back of the blouse, along with several strands of hair. The forensic report concluded that the blouse had been exposed to an area with blood splatter, indicating direct exposure rather than mere contact with the perpetrator or the victim's body. Experts suggested the splatter likely came directly from the victim, Irene. Further tests showed that traces of bodily fluids on the blouse matched Irene's DNA, while seminal fluid found on it matched the genetic profile of Carlos. Unfortunately, by this time, Carlos was unavailable for questioning due to a severe brain injury from a 2013 motorcycle accident, which left him with deep retrograde amnesia, erasing memories of events before the accident. Though investigators hit a dead end with Carlos, the forensic findings and additional witness statements provided grounds to implicate Isabella in a conspiracy to orchestrate her mother's death. Supporting evidence included statements from witnesses at Irene's funeral, where some recalled hearing Isabella whisper that she didn't mean for things to go so far. This admission prompted authorities to wiretap Isabella and Carlos's phone conversations and set up listening devices. Surveillance tapes captured sounds of intimate interactions between Carlos and Isabella at the residence, confirming a long-standing relationship. Combined with Isabella's 2003 assault report, in which she admitted to a 3-year relationship with Carlos, it became clear that her marriage to Cesar was merely a facade, supposedly arranged by Carlos to facilitate Cesar's immigration to Australia in exchange for affection and sexual encounters. Further corroborating evidence came from Irene's experiences living in fear with Isabella and Carlos, with Isabella willing to do anything to please him, blinded by obsessive infatuation. Hospital records from the night of the attack also noted Isabella's intense interest in seeing her mother post-autopsy, which was interpreted as a need to confirm Irene's death. Another damning testimony came from Paula, Carlos's ex-wife, who claimed that Isabella had once asked her if she knew anyone who could get rid of someone. Despite these incriminating pieces, it would take 2 more years for the case to see another breakthrough. In 2019, new testimony surfaced when Sean, a former acquaintance, disclosed that he had seen Carlos and Isabella together days after the crime. He also revealed that Carlos allegedly described how he had slit Irene's throat and promised Nicholas $10,000. Nicholas, meanwhile, said that on the night of the crime, Carlos had left to return a car to his boss's home around 8 p.m., returning between 11 and 11:30 p.m. Later, Carlos reportedly confessed the crime to Nicola after they went to a club around midnight. Due to his brain injury, however, Carlos might never face justice. On the morning of Tuesday, September 24, 2019, detectives arrested Isabella. A detective inspector present at the arrest informed the press that Isabella seemed stunned when officers arrived, and she was taken to the police station, where she awaited a murder charge. Police officials alleged that Isabella had planned her mother's murder and staged a break-in to cover up the crime, her primary motive being the financial gain from selling Irene's home. Following the arrest, Isabella was granted conditional bail but was held in custody pending her arraignment. Her defense argued that she had cooperated with authorities, provided DNA samples when requested, and handed over her passport in 2001 to comply with a travel hold. However, the prosecution denied bail, asserting that despite the circumstantial nature, the case was strong. The prosecution highlighted that the murder was financially motivated, with traces of Irene's blood found on Isabella's blouse from that night. Although the judge deemed the case reasonably strong, he felt it was not overwhelming, ruling that any flight risk from Isabella could be mitigated with strict bail conditions, including a $10,000 bond, twice daily check-ins at the police station, passport surrender, and no contact with witnesses. After remaining in police custody, Isabella's detention hearing proceeded in the New South Wales Supreme Court 3 days later. Nearly 3 years afterward, in May 2022, Isabella, formerly Megan Jones, age 48, was rearrested, and a New South Wales Supreme Court jury found her guilty of murdering Irene Jones on November 2, 2001. Upon hearing the verdict, Isabella expressed disbelief and claimed the jury had made a mistake. Finally, on November 16, 2022, Isabella was sentenced to 20 years in prison, with a minimum of 14 years before eligibility for parole. In delivering the sentence, the judge recounted that Irene had been ambushed in her kitchen while drinking a glass of water and had died from the combined effects of strangulation and stab wounds to her neck. The judge remarked that in her final moments, Irene must have felt confused, terrified, and betrayed, emphasizing that her own daughter had orchestrated and likely carried out her murder, driven by obsessive infatuation and greed. Though the defense argued that Isabella's direct involvement in the fatal attack could not be definitively proven, the court acknowledged her role in a criminal conspiracy with Carlos, who, due to his condition, would likely evade justice. Isabel would be eligible for parole in 2036, at which point she would be 62 years old, with her full term expiring in 2042. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.